If you include the loose cannon projects, the DCU has already had a wide range of villains, from iconic comic villains like Starro and Lex Luthor, to lesser known villains like White Dragon and Carapax, to even original characters like the Butterflies and Illana Rostovic. Going forward, there are many movies and many TV shows in production and in development that, at this point, we can only speculate about who will be appearing as the main antagonist. In this video, I'll be going over every confirmed DCU project and discuss who I'd like to see as the main villain, and also who I think is the most likely. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and become a member of this channel in the noble tier above for early access to videos, and in the king tier for a special shout out. Thanks to these members for the extra support. So far, the main and also secondary main villains of the DCU projects have been Starro, Thinker, and Amanda Waller in The Suicide Squad, Eekstack, Ik, The Butterflies, and The White Dragon in Peacemaker Season 1, Victoria Cord and Carapax in Blue Beetle, Illana Rostovic and Cersei in Creature Commandos Season 1, Lex Luthor, Ultraman, and the Engineer in Superman, and Peacemaker Season 2 is currently airing, but it seems like it's likely going to be Captain Triumph and Rick Flag Sr., unless something unexpected happens, in which case I couldn't have predicted it anyway. We also know that the villain of Supergirl will be Krem of the Yellow Hills, and the secondary main villain is likely Lobo. Looking at the sequels to these projects, let's start with Creature Commandos Season 2. Currently in development and possibly in production already, I'd like to see Creature Commandos follow up on certain aspects of the show that was set up in Season 1. Specifically, in Cersei's vision of the future, we see Illana Rostovic taking over the world, killing millions and every hero on Earth, except she wasn't alone. Inexplicably, Gorilla Grodd appears, joining Illana on her conquest. What's weird about this is that Grodd has no presence beyond this scene. He isn't mentioned, there's no reference to him, Gorilla City, or even his arch enemy beyond a small cameo in the background of this same vision. Nothing. Because of Grodd's appearance, this scene doesn't feel like it exists solely for the purpose of Season 1's story, but rather for either the rest of the series or even the entire DCU. According to James Gunn, however, every individual project is intended to stand alone in their own complete stories. Keeping that in mind, Grodd's appearance needs to be followed up on this show, not just the DCU as a whole. Because of this, I'd use Grodd as the main villain of Season 2 and have the Commandos be sent on a mission to Gorilla City. Grodd definitely shouldn't die and go on to have a larger presence either in the DCU or an eventual Flash franchise, but he definitely should appear in a large role in Creature Commandos, explaining his presence in Cersei's vision. Still in the Argus part of the DCU, Waller will be a unique project because Amanda Waller herself is kind of a villain. That said, the series might be similar to the Penguin, which, despite following a heinous individual, still had an antagonist in Sophia Falcone. For Waller, I'll be looking for something similar. She'd be the protagonist, but wouldn't exactly be a better person than the antagonist. I'm going to assume that Waller will deal with her building her way back to the top after being torn down, because she has kind of been getting worse and worse in every appearance. Knocked out after crashing out, being exposed by her own daughter, being duped by Illana Rostovic, and then replaced as Argus director before Peacemaker Season 2. It seems like Waller has been knocked down a few pegs, so she'll be at her lowest point at the beginning of her show, but then build her way back up to the top. That in mind, she'll likely be stepping over others in similar positions to get her way, and so the most clear choice for the antagonist is some sort of DC Comics special agent or governmental higher up. There are a few options, but I think the most likely is King Faraday, a Nick Fury type spy and high-ranking official of multiple fictional governmental organizations. I say he's definitely a better person than Amanda Waller, but again, he's the antagonist, not necessarily the villain. The Superman sequel is something we don't know too much about yet, but essentially, while it is considered a part of the Superman saga and the Super Family series of movies, it won't exactly be Superman 2. I made a dedicated video about this, but essentially there are two prime candidates for what this can be, and depending on which one it is, the main villain would change. One option is a shared sequel between Superman and Supergirl called Superman and Supergirl. In that case, there is a very obvious villain choice in Brainiac. Long overdue for a cinematic portrayal, Brainiac could force Clark to reckon with his Kryptonian heritage that he set aside in the first movie, while having a backstory of some kind with Supergirl. Brainiac is an obvious choice, but along the way he can also be responsible for bringing kryptonite to Earth and therefore helping create Metallo or Titano, or maybe he's responsible for the creations of certain villains getting powers, like Livewire or Parasite. I'd personally use less used villains like Titano and Livewire, especially since Metallo kind of already exists in this world in the prequel novel, but obviously they would be secondary main villains. Brainiac would be the main villain. The The other option is Superman and the Authority, and it would be based on the Warworld saga. In this movie, Superman would form a team of heroes to travel to the Warworld with the goal of overthrowing the evil tyrant Mongol. So obviously in this case, Mongol would be the big bad. He'd be joined by his daughter Mangal, making her appearance in the Suicide Squad non-canon, and this would be a great opportunity to continue Ultraman's story. In this case, Ultraman flew through the black hole which led to Warworld. He'd been then used as a gladiator while degrading physically and developing mentally, eventually becoming an amalgamation of Bizarro and Draga. Maybe to make this not a coincidence, Superman will actually go to Warworld because his face and symbol is now famous there. I'd like either, but I think Brainiac is more likely, and he's more long overdue for a live-action main villain movie role, but Mongol is definitely a close second choice for me. Branching out from Superman and Argus, next year we'll see the release of Lanterns, a show shrouded in mystery in regards to its main plot and villains. Among the few comic characters confirmed for the show is Sinestro, played by Ulrich Thompson, who is, like Hal, around 60 years old. Hal and Sinestro surely have a very long history together. Sinestro hasn't been used as the main villain in live action before, and just based on the uncertainty of Hal's continuing presence in this universe, I think Sinestro has a pretty big chance of being the main villain. That said, this is more John Stewart's story, and Sinestro is more Hal Jordan's archenemy, and the fact that this series will follow some sort of mystery means that there are definitely other possibilities. There are a few characters who have been cast who have been given vague descriptions which likely hint at the names they've been given being aliases for who they actually are. Anton, for instance, played by Paul Ben Victor, has a description that perfectly fits the villain Atrocitus, an ancient being whose entire space sector was wiped out by the Manhunters, the predecessors to the Green Lantern Corps. He later founded the Red Lantern Corps as well. He's certainly a possibility, but because this is a TV show, I automatically consider a character made out of CGI or a lot of makeup to be less likely, considering the tighter budgets and longer shooting times compared to a movie. The other characters have less clear descriptions, but I think given the premise of this series of it being on Earth and them investigating a murder, it would make sense that they are chasing after an Earth-based serial killer like Black Hand, which I think is easily the most fitting choice. I'm going to guess that both Sinestro and Atrocitus will be used as red and yellow herrings, while Black Hand will end up being the villain. Not just that, but I'm also going to guess Waylon Sanders will be revealed to be Black Hand, maybe even without changing that name, because his name in the comics is William Hand, becoming Black Hand. I could see them changing that. Later that year, we'll delve into the world of the DCU Batman with Clayface, a horror tragedy focusing on Matt Hagen becoming Clayface. I'm not sure how possible it is, but my excitement for Clayface would skyrocket if Batman appears. Not just that, but I think they have the opportunity to do something really interesting here. As Matt Hagen becomes Clayface, becomes desperate and turns to crime, the movie's horror elements will switch from body horror to an actual movie monster, that being Batman. We could see Batman from the villain's perspective, stalking from afar, residing in the darkness, covered in shadows, and always on Clayface's tail. The movie can be shot in such a way that we never really clearly see Batman's mouth, so he doesn't need to be cast yet. He's not a man, he's a force of nature, and that's what he looks like from the villain's perspective. We saw a glimpse of something similar in Creature Commandos, Batman from Dr. Phosphorus's perspective. This would be an entire third act of that. So Batman would be the main antagonist of Clayface. Before Batman's appearance, there wouldn't be a villain aside from, I guess, the person who gave Clayface his substance, and also the body horror involved with that. Honestly, my anticipation for this movie would just go from like a 3 to maybe an 8 or a 9 if this is the premise. If Batman isn't involved, it'd be more like a Joker or maybe even Spider-Man Sony spin-off situation where it's like, you just should have made a Batman movie. Sticking to Batman, there's Batman the Brave and the Bold, which promises to give us a fantastical Bat family-oriented Batman, but this time, good. Taking inspiration from Batman and Son and the rest of Grant Morrison's run on Batman, the movie obviously still has a multitude of options for the villain, as it takes from the best and biggest rogues gallery in comic books. We can certainly eliminate a few Batman villains who are being used in the Batverse, like the Riddler, Penguin, Catwoman, and the Joker, but otherwise I think everything is fair game. Considering the premise and comic inspiration, we know that the League of Assassins will be involved, and it's very likely they will be the villains. Specifically, Talia al Ghul was the villain of the original comic, and that's certainly a possibility, but it's been longer in live-action movies since Ra's al Ghul was used as a main villain. Ra's was dead at the time in the comics, and then in the animated movie adaptation, he died right at the beginning. In the DCU, he can certainly be the main villain. It wouldn't be the first time that Ra's is used as the main villain of a Batman movie, but it's been over 20 years since then, or it will be by the time that movie releases, appearances, and last time he was toned down to be more realistic. This time he could be in the full Lazarus Pit, hundreds of years old, green color scheme with daughters and a full League of Assassins, Ra's al Ghul glory. The original comic also includes Man-Bat, who I think fits well with the fantastical side of Batman as a secondary main villain for the movie. Looking further into the premise, we might focus just as much on the Bat family aspect of the movie as we do the League of Assassins, and it just so happens there's another character aside from Damian Wayne that connects the two in Jason Todd. I personally wouldn't love this since it's been done before a few times, but Red Hood would fit everything we know about the movie. His backstory includes being returned to life by Talia al Ghul using Lazarus Pits. Talia nursed him back to health before he began a vendetta against Batman. Jason has many motivations, but the one relevant to the Bat family is typically in regards to Tim Drake, since Batman replaced him pretty quickly and pretty easily. Damian appearing adds another layer to this we haven't seen before, the emotional toll it could take on Jason, as he feels like, as Batman's adopted son, he was replaced by Batman's biological son, making Damian more legitimate. They can make things different from the previous adaptations of Titans, Arkham Knight, and Batman Under the Red Hood by including Damian, but also I think it'd work better with Jason not being the main villain, instead having his strings pulled by one of the Al Ghuls. There are other options like Mr. Freeze, Scarecrow, Bane, Clayface, and many others, but for right now, the only basis we truly have to go off suggests the Al Ghuls, Red Hood, and Man-Bat, and so that's what I'm guessing. Ra's al Ghul as the main villain, Talia and Red Hood as secondary main villains, and Man-Bat as a more minor villain. Wonder Woman has the chance to further explore her rogues gallery beyond that of the DCU movies. In the DCU, she fought Ares, Dr. Poison, and Maxwell Lord, who we can eliminate, but she also fought Cheetah. That said, Cheetah wasn't the main villain of that movie. She was also terrible, looked terrible, was awful, and in an awful movie that nobody watched. She's also arguably Diana's arch enemy, so if any villain can still be the main villain being relatively recently used, it's the Cheetah. That said, I would prefer Cersei. Cersei is definitely Diana's most prominent villain, not yet used in live action, and she's already appeared in the DCU, appearing in Creature Commandos. Cersei is voiced by Anya Shalatra, who will play her in live action if she ever appears. From her appearance, it's clear she's been around for a while, and Themyscira is known, so she likely already has a past with Wonder Woman. She was kind of altruistic in Creature Commandos, trying to save the world and all, but was still definitely a bad person with a very criminal past, and she's currently in prison. That in mind, Cersei is the obvious choice. She's already cast, is easily Diana's most prominent villain who hasn't been used yet in live action, but at the same time, Cersei might instead be used in Paradise Lost, in which case they should give another crack at Cheetah, this time as the main villain, and this time good, while having Diana also face off against Giganta, and maybe a few other minor villains along the way. Paradise Lost is another unique project, a less traditional superhero story, more like Game of Thrones, which never really had much of a main villain, at least not until the last few seasons. Still, even if they aren't traditional main villains, we can have many Wonder Woman enemies from Greek mythology specifically debut here, like Ares, Phobos, and Deimos, and Alcyone, who is an Amazonian. Cersei could also definitely appear. The Hall of Justice Bureau suggests that maybe Paradise Lost will have some focus on Exoristos, maybe as one of the storylines in the style of Game of Thrones, set elsewhere focusing on a completely different group of characters. In that case, Paradise Lost can introduce villains beyond that of Greek mythology, and even beyond Wonder Woman's rogues gallery. Exoristos appears in the Demon Knights series, which features prominent villains like Mordru, Vandal Savage, and Morgan Le Fay, all of whom I can definitely see appearing. But there just wouldn't be a main villain, since it's just not that type of show. The Blue Beetle animated series will follow up on the events of the movie, but tell a new story. They kinda need to follow up on Ted Kord's disappearance and his message, but honestly, there's one thing the series can't focus on: the origins of the Scarab, the Reach. The Reach can be responsible for Ted Kord's disappearance, while obviously being the creators of the Scarab. The issue with that is that Young Justice Season 2, or Young Justice Invasion, already adapted that story in animated format, so I'm not exactly sure how excited I should be about seeing that again. Still, it's definitely what makes the most sense. So the Reach and Black Beetle involved would be the villains. Booster Gold has a small rogues gallery that could be split into two different categories, the ones that fit his first run and the ones that fit his second run. Initially, he faced present-day villains like a normal hero, but then in Booster Gold Volume 2, he became a time travel-based adventurer who faced time-traveling villains. I think the show will begin by focusing more so on the Volume 1 type villains, but I think it will derail throughout the season into time travel shenanigans. aliens. I would have said Booster Gold's father, John Carter, aka Supernova, can be the villain, but I think the DCU has already had enough evil fathers for now. Instead, maybe Rex Hunter could be a very fitting main villain, while we also meet Rip Hunter and the lore of the Time Masters. Then again, that might feel a bit too much like Legends of Tomorrow and the TVA from Loki, so maybe the series will be a bit more simple. In that case, I'd take the White Dragon approach, take the name Supernova and give it to someone else. It's possible that as a comedy, Booster Gold will be more episodic and not have a main villain, but whatever it may be, Booster Gold doesn't exactly have an iconic rogues gallery, and he's only had 2 runs in the comics. They could maybe take from a different hero, they can make something up, it wouldn't be that bad, as opposed to maybe a Batman movie where if they used an original character not from Batman's expansive rogues gallery, it would be insane. That said, I will guess a present-day version of Supernova as the villain. Swamp Thing also only has a handful of villains, but considering the movie is meant to take inspiration from Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing, and likely specifically the anatomy lesson, the Floronic Man is very likely. Then again, Anton Arcane was referenced on a prop in Superman, so maybe that's the plan. I think both will appear, we just don't know who will be the villain, but I think Floronic Man might have the villain with similar powers problem, while Arcane fits the horror genre very well, so my guess is Anton Arcane. We don't know anything about the Teen Titans movie aside from it being a Teen Titans movie, so all we have to go off of is the Teen Titans Rogues Gallery. Deathstroke is certainly a possibility, but there is also a Deathstroke and Bane movie, which might mean he's being used elsewhere. Otherwise, I think the movie should avoid the villains used on Titans, specifically Brother Blood, Blackfire, and Trigon. None of them were done particularly well, but I'd save Trigon and anything related to Trigon for a bit later, while Blackfire I think is maybe a bit too specific to Starfire. I think beyond that of what Titans did, the Fearsome Five are definitely the biggest Teen Titans villain, with Simon, Mammoth, Gizmo, Jinx, and Dr. Light being the members. Either Dr. Light or Simon can work as the leaders and as the actual main villains, saving Deathstroke, Trigon, Brother Blood, and others for sequels. Sergeant Rock is a movie we do have a premise for. It'll focus on Sergeant Rock and Easy Company going on a quest to find the divinely powered Spear of Destiny before the Nazis get their hands on it. So it's safe to say that the main villain will be a Nazi, and there is a character in the comics who is a Nazi and who did get his hands on the Spear of Destiny, that being Albert Krieger, aka Captain Nazi. Maybe he is already Captain Nazi and a super soldier, but also he could get his hands on the Spear of Destiny and turn himself into a super-powered Captain Nazi. I'm not exactly convinced that the Authority will ever be made, but if it does, the main villain options are any of the villains who appear throughout the Authority Volume 1, unless they want to use a DC villain, which I would not have an issue with, but since we have nothing else to go off of, I'd use the most interesting villain from the Authority, Regis Slizfy, the ruler of an alternate dimension that was taken over by aliens in the 16th century. With the alternate dimensions appearing in Superman and Peacemaker, it's entirely possible. Then there are 3 projects we don't know if they're in the DCU or not, including Deathstroke and Bane, which is also an atypical superhero movie considering it focuses on 2 villains, but I can't imagine it being a Deathstroke versus Bane movie with Slade as the protagonist and Bane as the antagonist and main villain. Otherwise, it could be a Secret Six movie, in which case it'd be more likely for Bane to be the protagonist and Deathstroke to be the antagonist, since the Secret Six were created to fight against the Secret Society of Supervillains, of which Slade was a member. But as a final prediction, since Deathstroke has been a protagonist a lot more than Bane has in the comics, I'm just gonna guess that Bane will be the main villain. Dynamic Duo focuses on the differing paths that Dick and Jason take in their superheroics, which, I mean, there's no way that doesn't revolve around the Joker, right? Maybe they're coming up with a completely new story, but Jason's descent into more violent, murderous vigilantism always surrounds the Joker. We've had an overabundance of Joker, just like always, but if the next time we see him is in a uniquely animated film in 3 years from now, I might even be excited for that by then. Then again, considering the premise, this project also has the potential for Red Hood as the main villain, while Nightwing is the protagonist. If that is the case, then I'd remove Red Hood as a villain in The Brave and the Bold. Mr. Miracle has a direct comic basis which depicts a war between New Genesis and Apocalypse and ends with Darkseid as the main villain. If this is canon to the DCU, I think they'll try to change the story to make it fit the canon and not change the universe too drastically, and thus instead of Darkseid, I'd use Granny Goodness, a very personal enemy of Mr. Miracle, as the main villain. If it's not in the DCU, then they could do anything and Darkseid could be the big bad. And so, to recap, if all my predictions are correct, the main villains of the DCU will be Starro, Butterfly and White Dragon, Captain Triumph and Rick Flag Sr., Victoria Cord and Carapax, The Reach, Supernova, Illana Rostovic, Gorilla Grodd, King Faraday, Lex Luthor, Creme of the Yellow Hills, Brainiac, Black Hand, Batman, Ra's al Ghul, Joker, Bane, Cersei, Anton Arcane, the Fearsome Five, led by either Dr. Light or Simon, Captain Nazi, Regis Slisfy, and Granny Goodness. Let me know if you disagree with anything in the comments down below and what you would change, and thanks for watching.